So in this video we're going to be talking about the first half of the Peloponnesian War. This is referred to as the Archidamian War after the Spartan king Archidamus II, and this essentially boils down into a confrontation of rival strategies between Archidamus on the one hand and Pericles on the other, and these are followed by the generals that succeed them until they play out and leave the war at a sort of untenable and unsatisfactory truce, which sets the stage for the escalation of the war, the final tragedy. The main thing about the Peloponnesian War as it breaks out is that, for one thing, nobody knows that it's going to be such a disaster. Nobody knows that it's going to be this horrible war that lasts an entire generation. Everybody goes off to war with the knowledge that this is a resolution of an existing crisis that will bring things to a new level of stability, that will resolve the tension and confrontation that everyone is feeling. And so, in that sense, the war is welcome. And there's also a widespread sense on both sides that it's going to be relatively short. That this war, one way or another, the Greeks have no experience with long, unendurable wars anyway. And in this case, everything is so heightened, everything is so sharp and focused that it seems it would have been impossible to believe that the war would, in 431 when it breaks out, that the war would last all the way to 404 when it finally plays out. And of course, we should remember in saying things like this that the calendar that we're using is being imposed upon them. Of course, neither the Athenians nor the Spartans nor anyone else knew that they were 431 years before the birth of some guy that we would later call Jesus Christ. So, just, every once in a while, it's good to remember things like that. So going into this war, there's a problem in that the Athenians and the Spartans, in setting off against each other, essentially have no they have no way of coming together against each other, of using their strengths against each other. Each side has a powerful advantage, which is almost impossible to bring to bear upon the other side. And this is one of the reasons why, if you're looking for reasons why this war lasts so long, one is this very thing, that the strengths that each side has cannot be effectively brought to bear against the enemy. And so Athens, we know, has wealth on its side, it has manpower on its side, and it has the undisputed advantage at sea. And it can make use of its wealth in order to bring together an enormous fleet and to train their sailors and marines as effectively as possible. They've been doing this for some time. They've been. Remember that the Delian League is established to fight the Persians under Athenian leadership in 478, and this is a naval alliance, an alliance in which the Delian League is successful in pushing the Persians out of Western Anatolia in a series of naval engagements. The Athenians have been perfecting the art of naval warfare since the Persian invasions, and so they are now the undisputed commanders of the sea. But what does that do against the Spartans? The Spartans don't engage in a great deal of sea trade, and so a blockade is relatively useless. And the Spartans have no navy, which means that the Athenian navy has nobody to fight. And so they can bring their navy to bear against Corinth to the extent to which Corinth is involved. But this is Corinth leaves the war to Sparta. and the Athenian navy can't sail up the tiny river that leads into Sparta and attack Sparta, attack the Spartan phalanx. By the same token, Sparta and its allies have undisputed advantage in infantry, and so they're able to bring to bear, large armies that are well trained on land. But the Athenians know that they can't beat the Spartans in fixed battle, and so they establish a policy of avoiding doing that. And so the result is the Spartan armies have nobody to fight, the Athenian navies have nobody to fight, and it's this burgeoning deadlock from the very beginning. Pericles' strategy is essentially in recognition of this. So Pericles' strategy is, we can't defend Attica on land. Archidamian is bringing his troops into Attica and expecting to fight the Athenian army, and so Pericles knows that this would be doom for Athens, at least in the short term, and so the tactic therefore must be to withdraw the Athenian people behind the impregnable walls of Athens. Athens can't be besieged because it has the long walls that connect the city of Athens to its port at the Piraeus, which means that behind the walls, the people of Attica won't starve. All that the Spartans can do is march into Attica and maybe burn a few fields or something like that. But it's not long before the campaign season ends, and they have to return back home with hardly anything accomplished. So, Archidamian is attempting to damage Attica. This is the Spartan strategy. Pericles prevents this as much as possible by preserving the Athenian population, the population of Attica, and as much of the movable goods as they have behind the walls of Athens. This has an unforeseen complication in that nobody knows about germ theory, nobody knows about how disease actually works, and so packed within the walls of Athens is a huge number of people that the city was not meant to accommodate, and their livestock, all of whom are producing vast amounts of waste, and all of the rotting food and everything else is a perfect environment in which to develop a horrific plague. Ancient cities in general are not designed to accommodate large numbers of people. Even when you have a great city like Athens, relatively few people actually live in the city itself. Most people live outside the city, walk into the city to deal with their daily needs. Cities are not engineered to deal with the constant presence of huge quantities of people. And so a plague develops in Athens which strikes down the population in huge numbers, in large swaths of people, a quarter, a third, half in some districts of the people are falling dead. And you can imagine the effect that this has on the Athenians. There's the practical disillusionment involved in losing so many people, so much of the manpower that would be called upon to fight. But there's also what this means for the Athenian relationship with the gods. If the gods are allowing this pestilence to run rampant through the population of Athens, does that mean that the gods are not on their side? Does that mean that the gods cannot be counted on? Does that mean that everything that the people believed in is torn out from under them? There's a huge psychological ramification of the plague of Athens on top of the massive practical effect. And it places Athens and Athenians at a major disadvantage, helping to sort of even the score. Especially since, symbolically, Pericles himself dies from the plague. And so we sort of move into a period in which the successors take on the roles that had been established by the previous leaders. We have Kleon taking over for Pericles, and where Pericles is smooth, and he rallied the people of Athens and spoke to them of their destiny, spoke to them of what they're fighting for. The funeral oration by Pericles is one of the most famous speeches attributed to a Greek leader. But especially in times of warfare, Kleon is much rougher, much harsher, and he suffers by comparison, so that so that even when he is successful, he is scorned. He must accede to harsher measures, because Pericles dies very early into the war and doesn't have to clamp down on the martial footing that Athens must now be on. Kleon must be harsher to the Athenians and to the Athenian allies to hold them in line with an iron grip. And so Kleon becomes more and more unpopular. He comes from a lower class, and so this is held against him as well. And meanwhile, on the opposite side, taking over for Archidamian is Brasidas, the Spartan general, and Brasidas is not only an outstanding general, and tactically and strategically, he is also capable of using tools other than warfare in order to break apart the Athenian alliance. Brasidas goes from ally to ally in the Aegean, and through simple arguments, is able to sway Athens's allies away from Athens. And the more oppressive Athens becomes, the harsher Athens becomes, the more successful Brasidas is in starting to pull members away from the Athenian alliance and weaken the Athenian position in the Aegean. And so we enter into this period in which things deteriorate more and more, and yet nothing can be concretely accomplished. And the war seems to be spinning. And so it's at this juncture that the great Athenian statesman Nicias is able to broker a treaty after both Kleon and Brasidas have died, and the entire war seems to be stalled in this mire of lack of accomplishment. Nicias steps in and brokers a peace which is supposed to last. It's supposed to be, hopefully, the end of the war, where Athens gives up bases it has captured in return for the allies that Brasidas won away from Athens, essentially trying to reestablish the status quo ante before the breakout of the war. This might have worked, but it just takes us back to the period of enforced, crystallized tension of the 30 Years' Peace, where nothing is resolved, and outbreak of hostility is inevitable. And Corinth and Megara don't sign on, which means that there's still a state of war. Not only with Corinth, but since Sparta is Corinth's ally, it doesn't really end the war with Sparta as well. And so there's this very uneasy truce, which hasn't ended the war, hasn't resolved anything at all, and is giving both sides an opportunity to figure out exactly what to do next. Athens is at 6s and 7s, because on the one hand, they don't want to give up and cause this war to be a draw like the undeclared war. They want to resolve this issue, but on the other hand, there's no obvious means by which to solve the problem of how to defeat Sparta. They can't fight them on land, and they can't fight them on sea. And so, everything is at this terrible stalemate. Meanwhile, Athens itself is so frustrated, so intent on ensuring that nobody steps out of line, that they become even more oppressive toward its allies, and they extend this oppression even toward supposedly neutral parties. Most notoriously at Melos. Melos is an island in the Aegean that is, it was originally founded by Sparta, but is neutral, hasn't allied itself with Sparta or Athens, has been keeping themselves out of this. During the period of the Peace of Nicias in 416, Athens decides that this is too much of an open-ended problem. They go to the Melians and say, "You must submit to us." And the dialogue between the Athenian envoys and the leaders of Melos that's presented in the history of the Peloponnesian War, as written by Thucydides, is, the dialogue itself is, a fictionalized account in which Thucydides is attempting to demonstrate, on the one hand, the Athenians are exhibiting this imperialistic purpose that is absolutely pragmatic, and they present an argument that reflects this, that Melos is a danger to us unless it's under our submission, and you're much better off agreeing peaceably to submit to us rather than opening up the possibility of us conquering you and killing and enslaving all your people. And the Melians, in the dialogue that's presented by Thucydides, present a moral argument that says that they can't give up their freedom because that's what it is to be Greek. And so the result of this is that neither side convinces the other. The Athenian envoys come away, and then the Athenian army and navy comes into Melos, takes the island by storm, and tears down its walls and cities, sells its women and children to slavery, and slaughters the men. And so the events are part of the narrative of the war. The dialogue is presented as a sort of set piece that demonstrates where Athens has come to as a result of the moral corrosion that they've undergone in undertaking this war and in building an empire. Melos, what happens there is one of the larger arguments for the idea of Athens having lost its soul somewhere along the way and converting the Delian League into an Athenian empire. And so it's well worth reading the Melian dialogue to get a handle on how these aspects of the war were presented by its greatest historian, Thucydides. Melos also sets the stage for the escalation of the war that takes place shortly after the abrogation of the Peace of Nicias and the establishment of a new strategy. A new, more aggressive, more bloody strategy that we will see more about in the next video. For now, that's that.